This is Anoraks even by my standards, but this little video is all about the various differences on Land Rover long nose casings. So first up we have this. This is a big bearing case. This is what it's known as. The big bearing relates to the fact that it has a much bigger pinion for the head bearing and a much bigger pinion tail bearing. If we actually look at the bearing there, that is huge compared with the bearings that come afterwards. So this is called a big bearing case. There is a video I've done separately on them. The things that differentiate this, apart from the fact it has a bigger bearing on the head, bigger bearing on the tail, and bigger bearings on the carriers each side, is it also has a filler plug and it has a removable nose cone. Now the removable nose cone is just one of those things that it's a nice to have, and it means that you can change your pinion seal should it leak really easily. So there are two types that can go on the end of here. You can get this one, which is aluminium with a steel flared shank at the end, and the seal sits in there of a particular type, and that sits on there and bolts on. You can either use the standard bolts with lock tabs, but if we're building this as a competition unit, we'll put upgraded 12.9 grade bolts with no lock tabs. This is a different version. This is just a one-piece aluminium. So that's a big bearing case, and we're just going to jump forward here. On the left is a big bearing case, and on the right is a Puma case. And as you can see, the Puma case is taller because it's missing the detachable bit that goes on the bottom. So here we have a big bearing case. It's obviously missing the bottom bit here because it's got the bolt on nose panel. And if we look on the weight, that is 15.3 kilograms. And if I now swap that over with the latest Puma case, which is obviously longer, so this bit is obviously in cast steel, not aluminium, this only weighs in at 12.4 kilograms. And that's because, even though it's taller, there's less metal in there. So very shortly after the big bearing case came out, and we're talking a minimum of a couple of years or so, Land Rover decided that they were going to make some changes. They kept the same bearings here, but the head bearing and the tail bearing is now much smaller. In fact, the head and the tail bearing on this case is exactly the same as all the casings right up to including the Puma. And it's very, very difficult to actually tell the difference between these two casings. We'll call this one the big bearing case and this one the not big bearing split nose case. They look almost identical when they're built up, and we buy loads of these in and we struggle to know which one's which until we actually take them apart, and we get still caught out. There are loads of these about. They are the second strongest case made, so that's the strongest, the big bearing case, followed by this one. Still has a detachable nose cone, and very much like the big bearing case, it has different types of nose cones, but they bolt on, and these have to be shimmed with brass shims to get the right height on the pinion. So these cases here continued for quite some time until Land Rover decided they could save more money by getting rid of this bolt on nose piece and having it as a one-piece unit. So enter what is known as a imperial casing, full length. Still has the caps on the top with the ridges across. It still has the wings that come down into the adjuster caps. It still retains the bigger bearings and bigger adjuster wheels, just like the big bearing and the one that came after it. Instead of having a nice brass plug, you now get a rather nasty steel threaded thing. But you still got a filler plug, which makes it quite nice. But then they get rid of the nose cone, so this is one piece. They also use the same caps on here. Some of them are lock wired, some of them aren't, but in the majority of them are lock wired. But the only difference between this and the non-big bearing case is that you've got a nose cone, you've got a different filler plug, and that's about it. Now this is a full length version. It hasn't got a detachable bit, and this weighs in at 13.4 kilograms. Got a picture for me now? So the next one to come along is what's affectionately known as a metric wing cap casing. This one still has the adjuster rings that lock in with a wing, still has the ridges on the top, but you go from a 7/16 BSF bolt to a metric M12, and you get a smaller bearing here. So the head and the tail changed when they went from the big bearing case. This still has the same head and tail of the smaller one. It now has a smaller carrier bearing and a smaller adjuster, and it also loses both the nose cone and loses the filler cap. So these are the ones that we probably see the most of. We use a lot of these for our diff pegging because they're the best value for money and one of the strongest. So this is probably the second strongest, maybe the third strongest, because the two split nose do have extra strength over these. But these are the ones we use most of the time, and they're pretty good value for money. And if we put this on our weighbridge, it comes in at 12.1, 12.2 kilograms. And so finally, the last casing Land Rover made, which comes in at 12.5 kilograms. This is what is known as a flat cap casing. Gone are the big heavy duty steel adjuster rings that pop down and lock into the adjuster ring, and you have a 3mm hollow cotter pin. What happens here is that if these diffs are overloaded, they'll crack along here on that line, because there's no ridges over here for strength, which makes it cheaper to produce as well. There's no locking rings, so this often is bent as well. Still got M12, still got the same head, tail and carrier as the earlier one here, but this is Land Rover's most recent efforts at a diff case. We do TIG weld these up. They don't weld anywhere near as nicely as that one, and those don't weld up anywhere near as nicely as the early ones. So not only have you got a reduction in weight, but you've got a change in the composition of the casting mix, if you like. The menu to make this cast steel is not as strong as that cast steel. Then couple the fact that you're going for smaller bearings, and you've got the flat caps at the top. So we predominantly keep these for what we call a non-pegged standard diff. A minute you start going to a peg diff, we move across to the wing cap type, because they're that much stronger, and if you go for the early ones, bigger bearings as well. So there you go, a quick walk around the various different casings from Land Rover for long nose units. And as you've probably worked out from now, the earliest is the best and the latest ones are the worst, and it's a diminishing curve in terms of strength and quality as the years tick by. And there you go. As I said, it's about as Anoraks as you can get. Bye for now.